Jeremiah Anderson had spent 5 years living in a lie, a life built on secrets and pretenses. He was a professor at Riverside Community College, teaching American literature, driving a 10-year-old Honda, and living in a modest two-bedroom house in Portland suburbs. His wife, Claire Ber, worked as a real estate agent, or so her business cards claimed. Lately, she'd been working late, very late. They had met years ago at a gallery opening. Claire had been magnetic, her auburn hair catching the light, her laugh infectious. Jeremiah, or as Claire knew him, Jerry Anderson, was drawn to her normality. She didn't ask too many questions about his past, which suited him perfectly. It should have been his first warning. She never pried. One afternoon, as he stood at his classroom window, watching students scatter across the quad, his phone buzzed. A message from Claire. Working late again. Don't wait up. He hadn't waited up in months. The gym membership, the expensive perfume, the way she angled her phone away when texting, all signs of something Jeremiah had come to observe but not confront. His father had always said, observing is survival, reacting is death. Jerry, you coming to trivia night? His colleague, Bernard Everett, poked his head into the classroom. Jeremiah flashed his perfected smile. Can't tonight, Bernie. It's my birthday. Claire's planning something. Bernard clapped him on the back, a smile spreading across his face. 32 and still got romance, he said, shaking his head. Little did Bernard know. Jeremiah had stopped believing in romance months ago. That evening, Claire was radiant as always. She'd made reservations at Pastor's, the Italian restaurant downtown where they'd had their first date. She wore the black dress Jeremiah once told her made her look like a movie star. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. Jeremiah had learned to recognize the theater of betrayal. His mother had staged similar performances before she tried to have his father killed. As they sat at the table, Claire ordered Jeremiah's favorite wine, then reached across the table to hold his hand. I've been thinking, she said, her green eyes unreadable, about us. Our future. Have you? Jeremiah kept his voice steady. Of course, he replied, his tone neutral. He'd inherited his father's emotional control. She continued, I want us to be completely honest with each other. The irony of it was almost amusing. Just as he was about to respond, a man approached their table, mid-40s, expensive suit, leather portfolio tucked under his arm. He introduced himself as Stuart Bruce and, with practiced sympathy, apologized for interrupting. Mr. Anderson, he said, my client felt this was the appropriate venue. Claire's smile turned cold, triumphant. Jerry, she said, now calling him by his first name instead of Jeremiah. I want a divorce. Stuart Bruce spread divorce papers across the table. These are the papers, he said, efficiently. Community property division, spousal support, the house, the car, half of his pension. The diners at nearby tables paused, their attention drawn to the spectacle. Claire leaned forward, her voice just loud enough for their audience. My lawyer will bury you, she said with a laugh that once captivated Jeremiah, but now sounded like breaking glass. Jeremiah picked up the pen offered by Bruce. He read through the papers, every page, every initial. He recognized the strategy. Aggressive demands, assuming he'd fight, negotiate, bleed money and legal fees. Instead, he signed everything with calm precision. Bruce hesitated. Sir, you might want your own attorney to review. It's fine, Jeremiah said quietly, signing the last page. Are we done? Claire's confusion was palpable, her triumph crumbling into disbelief. That's it? You're not going to fight? Jeremiah stood, the weight of the moment sinking in. Would you like me to fight, Claire? Would that make this more satisfying for you? Claire looked away, her triumph fading into confusion. Jeremiah stood up, placing his napkin neatly on the table. I think we're done here, he said quietly. He didn't look back as he walked out of the restaurant, his thoughts distant, his expression calm. Behind him, Claire's voice echoed in the room, sharp with confusion. What just happened? Stuart Bruce's voice was quieter as he spoke. I'm not sure, but we'll proceed as planned. I'll file the papers tomorrow. As Jeremiah stepped outside into the cool Portland evening, He felt a strange sense of peace. The last 5 years had been a lie, a comfortable one. Now it was over. He would no longer play the part of Jerry Anderson, the invisible professor. The real work was just beginning. The calm of the night felt different now, more like freedom than uncertainty. The next day, Claire was in a whirlwind. Her lawyer had withdrawn. Ramon, the gym owner who had been her lover, was nowhere to be found. Her life, built on careful deception, was falling apart. She had expected a battle, but instead, she had gotten nothing. No arguments, no emotional outbursts. Just a quiet surrender. While Claire tried to gather the pieces of her shattered plan, Jeremiah moved into his new apartment. It wasn't much, just a furnished place across town, but it was his. No more pretending. No more hiding behind a false identity. The silence in the empty space felt like a fresh start. He knew Claire would try to contact him again, but he wasn't concerned. He had already seen the real her, and now it was time for him to reclaim his life. That evening, as Jeremiah unpacked the last of his things, his phone buzzed. A message from his mother. "Your father wants to come to Portland." I told him no. He smiled slightly at the message. "Tell him I don't need him here. I'm doing fine." His mother's reply was swift. "Just be careful. Revenge is not the same as justice." Jeremiah read her message and sighed. He didn't need revenge. He needed clarity, and he was finally getting it. The next few days were quiet. Claire had disappeared into her world of panic and confusion, while Jeremiah focused on the life he was finally ready to build. But things were far from over. He knew that once Claire realized the full extent of what he had done, she would come looking for answers. And when she did, he would be ready. As he continued with his plans, he got a call from Bernard Everett, his former colleague from the community college. "Jerry, I can't believe it. How did you know? How did you know she was planning all of this?" Jeremiah leaned back in his chair, his voice calm. "I'm a good observer, Bernie. I've spent years watching, listening." He had known from the start. The signs were there, too many late nights, too many secrets. Bernard paused, processing the information. "But everything, the papers, the divorce. It's like she didn't even put up a fight." Jeremiah's smile was small. "I didn't need her to fight. I needed her to show me who she really was." He had gotten exactly what he wanted. Claire had believed she was controlling the narrative, but in reality, Jeremiah had been 2 steps ahead the entire time. As the days passed, Jeremiah found himself settling into a new rhythm. He no longer had to pretend to be someone he wasn't. He was building something real now, a community center in Portland. The project was about much more than just buildings and structures. It was about offering people a chance at something better, a place to grow, to learn, to escape the struggles of their everyday lives. It was something Jeremiah had always wanted to do, but until now, he hadn't been ready. The weeks flew by as Jeremiah immersed himself in the community center project. The plans were taking shape. 40,000 square feet of space that would offer job training, education, and childcare services to the neighborhood. As he walked through the building, seeing the potential in every corner, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The center wasn't just a building. It was a statement, a way to use his resources for something that truly mattered. Meanwhile, Claire had retreated to Sacramento, the city that now felt like her sanctuary. She had kept a low profile, quietly rebuilding her life, but there was always something unsettling in her silence. Every time she checked her phone, she half expected to see another message from Jeremiah. But there was nothing. The videos, the ones Jeremiah had threatened her with, haunted her. She had made a deal to stay quiet, to leave Portland, but part of her still wondered if he was watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. One day, as Claire sat in her office, her phone rang. An unknown number. She hesitated before answering, her fingers trembling slightly. "Hello?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. The voice on the other end was calm, measured. "Claire Boyer? I'm Clarence Tate. I represent certain interests related to your husband's family." Claire's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaky. The man continued, "You have 48 hours to withdraw your divorce petition and leave Portland. If you do this, everything you've set in motion will stop. Claire's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. Are you threatening me? She asked, her words barely more than a whisper. No, Clarence replied, his tone colder now. I'm offering you an exit. You can stop everything right now, or you can keep going, and I cannot guarantee your safety. The line went dead before Claire could respond, leaving her in stunned silence. She had spent months planning, scheming, but now everything felt out of her control. Panic settled over her as the reality of the situation hit. Claire knew her options were limited. She could try to fight, continue with her plan, but the warning was clear. She wasn't dealing with an ordinary man. Jeremiah was no longer just Jerry Anderson, the man she had married. He had become something much more formidable. With her mind racing, Claire tried to regain control. She looked up her husband's name again, hoping to find some explanation, some way to fight back. What she discovered sent a chill through her. Jeremiah Anderson, born in Philadelphia, a name she had never heard before. The more she dug, the more unsettling the information became. Jeremiah had connections she couldn't have even imagined. A photograph surfaced during her research. Jeremiah, young and standing next to a couple at a charity gala. The woman was elegant, dark-haired, and sharp, the man unremarkable except for his eyes. Claire recognized those eyes. They were the same cold, calculating eyes Jeremiah had shown her during their marriage. And the names? Marcus Anderson, Elena Klov. The Anderson family, the same family that had been built on power, money, and fear. Claire sat in her office, her hands shaking as she processed the weight of what she had uncovered. Jeremiah's past wasn't just hidden, it was buried, carefully crafted. He had walked away from a fortune, from a legacy of wealth and power. She had thought she was in control, thought she could manipulate him like everyone else. But now, the game had changed. The phone rang again, interrupting her thoughts. This time, it was Stuart Bruce, her lawyer. His voice was different, strained, almost nervous. Claire, he began, we need to talk. I've found something you need to know. His words hung in the air, and Claire felt the world start to shift beneath her. Something was coming. Something she couldn't stop. What have you found? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Bruce hesitated before replying. You need to look into Jeremiah's family. I think you've made a huge mistake. Claire sat frozen, the words echoing in her mind. A mistake, she repeated to herself. Her fingers tightened around the phone, her mind racing. She had made a mistake, but not the kind Bruce was thinking of. She had underestimated Jeremiah, believed his past was nothing but a shadow, something to be ignored. But now, everything was unraveling. He wasn't just some quiet professor. He was part of something much bigger, something she wasn't prepared for. Claire, Bruce said, his voice shaking slightly, I'm not sure what's going on, but I've found a connection between your husband and a very powerful family. The Andersons. The Philadelphia Andersons. Claire's blood ran cold. Her mind spun as the name hit her. She had heard whispers, seen the subtle power shifts in their circles, but she hadn't connected the dots. Jeremiah never told me about them, she said, her voice trembling. He told me he was from nowhere. Bruce's voice dropped to a near whisper. Claire, I don't think you fully understand what you're up against. Marcus Anderson, Jeremiah's father, he's one of the wealthiest men in the country. The kind of power that can make people disappear without a trace. And Jeremiah, he's not just hiding. He's choosing this life. But now that you've pushed him, he might choose to bring it all back. Claire felt the ground beneath her shift. The quiet life she had built, the one she had carefully constructed with her lies and schemes, was crumbling. She wasn't just up against a man who had grown tired of her. She was up against an entire family, a legacy. A legacy that could destroy everything she had worked for, everything she thought she had earned. Her mind raced. There had to be something she could do, some way to salvage her situation. But then she remembered the video. The grainy footage that had shown her in compromising situations with Maxwell Camp, the property developer. The messages, the threats from an unknown number. It all felt like a trap closing in around her. She had been so sure of herself, so confident that she would win. But now, all her plans seemed meaningless. The silence in her office was suffocating. She reached for her phone and opened the video again, watching herself, a woman she no longer recognized. She saw herself kissing Maxwell, her hands tangled in his, as though the world outside didn't matter. The timestamp said it was during business hours, when she had been supposed to be showing properties. Her stomach twisted. Another text arrived. I have 12 more videos. Locations include your office, his condo, and 3 different hotels. Want to keep playing? Claire's hand shook as she read the message. This wasn't just a warning. This was a threat. The game she had been playing, the one she thought she controlled, was over. She wasn't in charge anymore. A third message followed, the words clear and final. Withdraw the petition. Tonight or tomorrow. Everyone you know will receive these videos. Your clients, your broker, your family. Choose wisely. Claire stared at the screen, feeling the walls close in around her. The person on the other end wasn't playing games. They were forcing her into a corner, and this time, there was no way out. Her mind was a whirlwind. She had worked so hard, clawing her way up from nothing, believing she deserved everything she had fought for. But now, the weight of her actions was suffocating her. The money, the property, the lies, it all seemed so small now. She had thought she was playing a game, but she had been the one being played all along. Claire's hands trembled as she put the phone down, the decision weighing heavily on her. She had a choice to make. She could fight, continue to push against the tide, or she could fold and disappear. But the thought of running, of losing everything, filled her with panic. She had built this life with careful precision, step by step, and now it was slipping through her fingers. Was she really going to let it all go? Her mind kept returning to the phone call from Clarence Tate. He had given her a warning, a chance to walk away. But now, she wasn't sure if she had the courage to leave. The promise of financial security, the offshore account she had built in secret, still lingered in her thoughts. Was that really all that mattered? Could she live with herself knowing how much she had taken from people she had once called family? The tension was unbearable. Claire's office, once a symbol of her success, now felt like a prison. She picked up her phone again, her eyes darting to the text message, the one she had been avoiding. Withdraw the petition. Tonight or tomorrow. Her fingers hovered over the keys, but no words came. For the first time, she didn't know what to do. She couldn't escape Jeremiah's quiet, calculated revenge. She could feel it in her bones, and it terrified her. Jeremiah, on the other hand, was calm. The pieces of his life had been falling into place in a way that surprised even him. The community center was thriving, and he was slowly rebuilding the life he had once hidden from. His phone buzzed, a message from Bernard. You're making a real impact, Jerry. People are starting to take notice. Jeremiah smiled at the message. This was the life he had wanted, not the one he had been pretending to live. As Jeremiah stood in his office at the community center, looking out at the bustling neighborhood below, he felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Everything was coming together. The work, the people, the community, it was real. He didn't need the money, the power, or the control that his family had once wielded. What he had now was more valuable. He had a purpose, and it was something no one could take away. The phone rang again, but this time it wasn't a call from Claire. It was from his mother, Elena. How are you doing, Jeremiah? She asked, her voice steady but tinged with concern. I'm doing fine, he replied. The community center is going well. I'm finally building something real. There was a pause on the other end before Elena spoke again. Your father is watching. You know that, right? Jeremiah knew exactly what she meant. His father, Marcus Anderson, the patriarch of the family, always kept an eye on him, even from afar. But this time, it didn't matter. Jeremiah had chosen his own path, and it was one he would follow, no matter what. I'm not going back, Mom, he said firmly. I'm doing this my way. Elena's voice softened. I know, son. Just be careful. The world you're stepping into is still dangerous. Later that evening, Jeremiah sat down with Bernard to discuss the next steps for the community center. They talked about potential partnerships, outreach programs, and how to expand their services to reach more people. Jeremiah's focus was sharp, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. He wasn't Jerry anymore. He wasn't even Jeremiah Anderson, the man hiding from his past. He was someone new, someone whole. As the meeting wrapped up, Bernard slapped him on the back. "You've got this, Jerry. I've never seen you more confident." Jeremiah smiled, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes. "This isn't about confidence, Bernie. It's about purpose. And I've finally found mine." The two men stood up, shaking hands, and Jeremiah felt the weight of his past lift a little more. He was no longer running from who he had been. He was running toward who he wanted to become. A few months later, the Anderson Community Center was no longer just an idea. It had grown into a thriving hub for the local community. Children were receiving free education, adults were learning new job skills, and families were finding a place of support in a neighborhood that had long been forgotten. Jeremiah stood in the center's main hall, watching a group of children play, their laughter echoing off the walls. He had built something lasting, something real. Jeremiah was no longer just the quiet professor or the man who had once lived a life of lies. He had become a leader, not through power or money, but through service. The people in his community looked to him with respect, and he had earned it, not because of his last name or his family connections, but because of the work he had done with his own hands. His past had taught him the value of power, but his future was teaching him the value of humility. One evening, as the sun began to set over Portland, Jeremiah received a text. It was from his mother, Elena. "Your father is proud of you. He's watching from a distance, but he's proud." Jeremiah smiled, knowing that his father, for all his faults, had always understood the importance of making a mark on the world. He hadn't needed to inherit the family empire to do that. Jeremiah sat in his modest apartment that evening, thinking about how far he had come. The road had been long, filled with secrets, betrayals, and lessons learned the hard way. But he had emerged stronger, more determined, and finally free from the shadow of the man he used to be. He didn't need the Anderson name to define him. He had built a new legacy for himself, one that would outlast the mistakes of his past. As he prepared to go to bed that night, Jeremiah thought of Claire, of the life they had once shared, of the lies that had torn them apart. He had long ago let go of the anger, the frustration, the feeling of betrayal. But he couldn't help but wonder if, deep down, Claire had ever truly understood him. Had she ever really known who he was, or was he just a figment of her own ambitions, a means to an end? In the months that followed, Claire had kept a low profile in Sacramento. She had rebuilt her life under a new name, trying to move on, but Jeremiah had heard whispers of her involvement with the property developer, Maxwell Camp, and the scandals that followed. It didn't matter anymore. She was no longer a part of his life. Jeremiah had moved on, and the life he had built now was stronger than anything she could ever take from him. Jeremiah still drove his Honda Civic, still lived in his modest apartment. He had not succumbed to the lure of wealth or luxury. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was focused on his work, on the community he had built, and on the people who believed in him. And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly at peace with who he was. As the Anderson Community Center expanded, Jeremiah's influence grew, but not in the way he had once feared. He wasn't using his family's wealth to gain power or control. Instead, he was using his resources to help others, to make a real difference in the world. And in doing so, he had created something far more valuable than any fortune. He had created a legacy of kindness, compassion, and service. One day, Bernard sat down with Jeremiah over coffee, as they had done so many times before. "You've really turned everything around," Bernard said, looking out at the community center's bustling activity. "I never thought I'd see the day." Jeremiah smiled. "I didn't either," he said quietly. "But sometimes you have to burn everything down to build something better." "So, what's next?" Bernard asked. Jeremiah paused, thinking. "I'm not sure," he replied honestly. "But whatever it is, I'm going to do it my way." He wasn't looking back anymore. He had already built his future, one step at a time, brick by brick. The man who had once hidden from his name, from his past, had finally found his place in the world. And in that moment, as he looked around at the life he had created, he knew that he had made the right choice.
The phone rang.
It was his mother again, a rare occurrence. "Jeremiah, your father wants to meet you," she said, her voice as steady as always. Jeremiah paused for a moment. "Tell him I'll be there," he said. It was time to face his past, to finally come full circle. The meeting was quiet, calm. Marcus Anderson, the man who had once controlled everything in his life, sat across from Jeremiah, watching him with an unreadable expression. "I've been watching," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of years. "And I'm proud of what you've done. I never thought you'd use the family resources like this, but I see now that you're doing something far more important than I ever could have imagined." Jeremiah nodded, his gaze steady. "I'm not using them the way you would, but I'm using them in a way that matters. I don't need the empire to feel powerful. I've built something real." His father studied him for a long moment before finally speaking. "You've grown, Jeremiah. I see that now." The conversation didn't last much longer. There were no offers of wealth, no promises of power. But as Jeremiah left that meeting, he felt something shift within him. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding. He had embraced who he was and who he had become. Later that evening, as Jeremiah looked out over the Portland skyline, he felt a sense of fulfillment. He had faced his past, his family, his fears, and come out stronger. And as he looked at the community center, buzzing with life, he knew that the legacy he was creating was more than just a name. It was a story that he was writing himself. Jeremiah Anderson had spent years running from his past, from his name, from everything he had been taught to fear. But in the end, it was not his past that defined him. It was his choices, his actions, and the legacy he was building. The greatest revenge, he realized, was not in destroying those who wronged him. It was in living well, living honestly, living without fear. 1 year later, the Anderson Community Center had expanded to 3 satellite locations across Portland. Jeremiah Anderson had become a quiet but powerful voice in local philanthropy. He still drove his Honda Civic, still lived modestly, and still preferred coffee shops to country clubs. But the world now knew his name. And when they said it with respect, not because of his family's fortune, but because of what he had built. Claire Boyer, now living under a new name, had stayed quiet and rebuilt her life far from Portland. She never returned, never looked back. Jeremiah had let her go, and in doing so, he had freed himself. He no longer had to live in the shadow of a past that no longer defined him. Jeremiah Anderson had finally become the man he had always wanted to be. Not the man others expected him to be, but the man he had chosen to become. His legacy was his own, a legacy built on second chances, on doing what was right, and on living without fear. And for the first time in his life, he was truly free. Please like, comment, and do not forget to subscribe.